My greetings. I'm thankful for the invitation to address this important conference. Many have spoken before me about the heroic history of Ukraine warriors, and I certainly join those who take pride in Ukrainian heroes, and I pay my tribute to the memory of all those who died in battles. And I would also like to share my private thoughts about today's condition of Ukraine's defense, its strategy, the state of its military organization. I also want to share my personal views on the miscalculations of Ukraine's defense, which resulted in significant human loss as well as losses of territory. How did everything start? As we know, the Ukrainian military was established by means of an evolutionary transformation of the former Soviet forces on Ukraine's territory. Time has shown that along with that, the Soviet mindset in the attitudes of Ukraine's political leadership to the military and the approaches towards defining the foundations of defense policy, the realization of the guarantees of security, especially understanding the external threats and the choices of the allies. Those hesitations, the Soviet mindsets, long accompanied that process. Inside the military establishment itself, such attitudes also existed. Loyalty to Ukraine on the one hand, alongside with the desire to keep familiar, comfortable conditions of the past. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, I was serving in the higher command positions of Ukraine's Air Force, and I could see how the officer corps, unlike in contrast to the supreme leadership, were getting more and more sense of the injustice of the existing system. Especially the militaries were unhappy about the politics of promotion when ethnic Russians were promoted better than non-Russians. And the key moment in shaping the protest attitudes in the military were the events of August 1991 with the attempt of the military coup. The vast majority of officers expressed their protest to the to the Soviet system, and they pledged their allegiance to independent Ukraine. It was in those days of 1991 the historical self-determination of Ukraine's commissioned officers that were the first steps for Ukraine military. At that time, fortunately, we were able to reduce and largely Ukrainianize that military empire, which was the biggest next to Russian military machine in Central Europe. I celebrate the glory of those officers who made those first steps to establish Ukraine's military apparatus, the one that is now nourishing the defenders of Ukraine, the fighters against separatism and Russian aggression. I salute them personally, those Ukrainian heroes who are present in our room. And this newest period of Ukraine's liberation struggle, in this period, the reliability of Ukraine's military was a necessary criterion, but it was not sufficient. At the time of 1991, the Soviet troops stationed in Ukraine became a base for creating Ukraine's military. They included nearly 1 million people with 4 operative groups, 1 missile army of special purpose with 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles, with nearly 600 combat-ready warheads in military duty, 4 Air Force armies, 2 divisions and separate regiments of long-distance strategic bombers, huge amounts of armaments of the land forces, the Black Sea Fleet, and a variety of units of intelligence, bases, control and command centers, warehouses and supplies. What is the situation now? Unfortunately, the time that has passed can hardly be called heroic in the context of the history of Ukraine's military. Most of the time was the time of hesitations and indetermination, miscalculations and lost opportunities. Now, and perhaps reasonably so, it is believed that most recently our defense had to be established from scratch. I agree with that, but why did we have to start a rebirth of our military? Because the foundational principles of its establishment were determined wrongly. Prior to that, we had a huge human resource and material base for the military of Ukraine. So why, in the course of 2 decades, that resource was not properly used? Why that huge resource had not been used effectively? The state defense policy did not create proper guarantees for military security. So, and why those who we considered our brothers became aggressors? The enemy who had been considered enemy by our propaganda became our ally in this war. Those are not rhetorical questions, and the answers to them are in that very same Soviet mindset. What happened to our defense capabilities? In my view, from the very start, we did not have a properly serious attitude to the question of the allies. The key thesis of that thinking was first and foremost Soviet mentality. That Soviet mentality did not assume that there would ever be any complications in the relations with Russia on the majority of key questions, even though the principles of independence did not envisage any military or political alliance with Russia. And likewise, Ukrainian leaders were very cautious in matters of military alliance with the West. From the very beginning, our laws envisaged military cooperation with the NATO, and that course, at least officially, was supported by every Ukrainian administration. And this was true in regard to relations with the US and many countries of Europe. So in the course of a short time, we made important steps, started peacekeeping and international partnerships with the NATO. That was in 1992 and 93, and since 1997 we have had a special partnership with the NATO. We also established a number of working groups and commissions, and we are the only partner that has taken part in all peacekeeping operations of the NATO, and we cooperate on issues of emergencies. In scientific research, we received assistance in utilization of missile fuels, as well as missile silos. We were among the first to open a NATO liaison office in Kiev, developed joint documentation standards, developed a broad information program, and we founded a Ukraine Commission. Also established a Ukraine mission to the NATO headquarters, and many times we took part in the meetings of the NATO Council. But our problem is that we continued to be entertained by thoughts about partnership, peaceful coexistence, etc. In the course of many years, Ukrainian government never clearly determined NATO partnership, NATO membership as its ultimate goal. Every time, every new government was looking towards Moscow with the fear that Moscow could get offended by some of our steps. Russian mindset also, Soviet mindset also dominated in the parliament, in government offices, and in control and command bodies of the military. In the course of 20 years, we did not take important steps to shape organization basis for partnership and to achieve true compatibility, operational compatibility with the NATO. The authorities did not hear warnings, but instead the military leadership continued to say, we are not expected as members of the NATO, and they kept talking about defense sufficiency as a mantra, a mistaken concept of our distorted defense policy was this. It was believed that we'll be partners with the NATO, special partners, and we'll be eternal brothers with the Russian Federation, so threat will come from nowhere. There'll be no threat in the future. Thus, the military is not very important, what with our concept of defense sufficiency. So instead of a reform, we were conducting long-term reductions, and this was damaging for the army. A lot of resources were stolen and embezzled. Such approach to defense policy became especially developed in after 2010, and this style of key leaders' work was really supported in high places of government. Key jobs in the military were given not only to those who did not have proper professional skills, but those were individuals who lacked patriotism and were citizens of a foreign country. This is why when the war started, we had to replace many people in command positions and work towards rebirth of the army. So those 2 decades can hardly be seen as a heroic period in Ukraine's military history. Instead, there was a phase of stagnation, which applies not only to the military but to the whole government of Ukraine, which resulted in helplessness in command and government operations. This resulted in many human losses, losses of territory and infrastructure. This, I think, is where the prerequisites of our defeat in the undeclared war have existed, and treason among many officers of the military and security. What caused that situation? First and foremost, it was ignorance of foundational principles of human resource policy. I mean, the presence of Ukraine roots in the command chain, and number 2 is the maintaining the principle of exterritorial staffing. Hence came the approach to look at the military budget as a source of personal enrichment, rather than readiness to defend your own land. Until today, we hear in the hallways of the Verkhovna Rada, we could never imagine that Russia will fight a war against us, and we'll have to use weapons against them. My next position is this: the supreme leadership of Ukraine failed to understand the historical context of relations with Russia. They failed to realize the necessity to have a military political ally, and they ignored the importance of collective defense capabilities. Hence, short-sightedness of the government, who refused in 2006 to move on towards action plan for membership, with a prospect of full membership in the NATO. As the result, there were serious miscalculations in defining the defense system and protection of Ukraine's borders. Assignments for disposition of our military units and orders for operations in the so-called special period. Further, I have mentioned the insincerity of our leaders as a factor. Those who were parts of several governments of Ukraine those who, by definition, should have understood what is the essence of Ukraine's defense requirements and where threats can come from. Those who had to see that the reductions and embezzlement are ruining for the military capacity. Those who overlooked wrong appointments to key positions. Those who should have analyzed and should have known everything and should have alarmed the rest, but continued to stay silent and get awarded. The list of those causes includes too reserved policy of the West in regard to Ukraine. In my personal understanding, when I was the ambassador to the NATO, we had anticipated, when we anticipated to get the partner membership action plan, I think we were more prepared than some of the current members of NATO. But we continue to hear from our government officials as well as our Western partners that we are not ready. That's right, Ukraine was not properly determined in its goals. But there were opponents to this in the NATO. Both sides, I think, were under the influence of the Russian position. This is true. Some of the blame is on me personally, because I had not been sufficiently insistent when I held those government positions myself. History does not have a subjunctive mood, but still we can assume that if back in September 2006, Ukraine government had not refused to accept the membership action plan with a prospect of becoming full-fledged member of NATO in 2008 or 2009 and join the full system of collective security of NATO. And if it hadn't been for that pro-Moscow policies and artificial information vacuum in regard to NATO among our people, if our people had clearly realized what the guarantees of security for our country were, if all those things had been in place, then all the heroes of the Maidan, all the deaths of our military and civilians in the east of Ukraine who were killed by separatist aggression, all those people would have been alive today. The last thing I want to say. The program for building up Ukraine's military capability and defense capability should aim at full membership in the NATO. President Poroshenko is taking practical steps towards that, and I hope we will accomplish that. That would be the guarantee of our security, but we failed to use that opportunity. For the future, that is the key to stopping the aggression, to bringing peace back to Ukraine, and to removing the threat that exists for Europe today. I heard more than once when I was in Brussels that Ukraine is a crucial factor of stability and security in Europe. I would like to emphasize that this thesis today is as meaningful as never before. Ukraine in the NATO is not just a consumer of security, it is also a reliable contributor. Our military personnel with combat experience will be an important component of security, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe at large. This would make it impossible for NATO to make any decisions that would be harmful to collective security. Controls from NATO would not allow Ukraine leadership to make wrong steps and irresponsible appointments, because those would be harmful to the collective interests of European countries. So that would be a true step towards overcoming Ukraine's corruption as well. I hope that the Commission and NATO Ukraine in the course of next year's summit will support our application for joining the program of Enlarged Opportunities program. But the time has come, I think. It's long overdue to stop, invent new and new programs for our preparation, which facilitate Moscow's interests. Rather, we should analyze our accomplishments in the scope of the MAP that Ukraine has been working on over the last few years, and we should be given a clear prospect of joining European and Euro-Atlantic integration, because all branches of government of Ukraine and over 70% of Ukraine citizens have a consensus an alliance, a membership in NATO. That would be a good start for Ukraine's new military history. Thank you.